What is the difference between a Mark 1 Citroen BX and a Mark 2 Citroen BX? An excellent question. Glad you asked. We have an opportunity to find out because this is my very early 1983 Citroen BX, which is probably going to be my very early Citroen BX from 1983 for about one more week because I've sold it. He's paid and everything. This is, as you can see, another BX. It's not my BX, this is a customer's BX. A very, very late BX. This is a 16 TXI built in 1992. Now, although these two aren't direct descendants, because the TRS became the TZS, the TX series came after the TG series, which came after the R. It went RS, TGS, TXS and I, which is what this is. So yeah, we've got a bit of a mix, but do you know how difficult it is to get an A-Reg BX and a K-Reg BX together in one place? Actually, it was really easy because it was here already, because I am working on this one. So this car is kind of in pieces. It's not fully together. Don't judge it, it's not finished. This is having a lot of work done. This one needs some prettying, but I've done all the work underneath it. Now, I'm not going to be driving these cars, mainly because this one isn't road legal. But to be honest, although there are some differences in how they drive, it's not massive. There are much bigger differences on top of the skin, everything you can see here. So I thought it would be fun to go through them. Please excuse the wire, I'm plugged in, very 80s. So, the differences. Bumpers, look, they're different. The style at the front to the Mark II and the Mark 1, kind of similar. They have tried to carry that style over, but this Mark II is much more rounded, much more angular and square on here, because of course as soon as the BX came out, you have to remember that so did the Ford Sierra, and everyone who launched a car around the same time as the Ford Sierra went, "Don't!" So yeah, it got rounded pretty quickly, much more curvy here. This is just origami. The indicators are also different, as you can see. I don't know why they did this, to be honest with you. I think this was just like, well, let's make it a different shape to the headlight, just because. In the end, they did take it to the top of the headlight, and to be completely honest, I think that looks better. It's not just the front bumper that's different as well. The rear is different. I mean, what are the odds? But they really are quite different. You see, the Mark 1, again, very square, very angular, carries this kind of theme here, I suppose. This double ridge that goes around and stops there. Quite a short bumper there to there, and then it has a black valance along the bottom of it. As opposed to this, much deeper, a little bit of a diffuser at the bottom there, but overall, fairly different. While we might also see that this is a textured bumper, which is normally body colour, but has faded quite badly. Well, don't worry, I'll answer that. And this one is painted. This is only because it's a very late car. The first Mark II's had a coloured textured bumper like this one. They don't fade quite as badly as those, but they do fade. Incidentally, I have not done anything with this one for a while. A, because Back to Black and all the associated products do not touch it, and it needs repainting, and the more of that stuff I put on, the harder it's going to be for the next guy to repaint it. So I'm not going to. I'm thinking of him. And I'm lazy. Well, I wasn't going to get very far in this comparison video without mentioning the dashboards. A lot of people will be screaming at the screen, going, "Dashboards! The dashboards are different! The dashboards are different!" Alright, let's dedicate some time to the dashboards. So we're in the Mark 1, and as you can see, it all looks a bit crazy. Let's see if the rev counter works. We're going up. It's a little temperamental, as can be evidenced by the fact that it is currently not counting revs. Never mind. So yeah, the Mark 1 differs quite a bit. So this is the first, when Citroen came up with the BX, they came up with a number of different designs for the interior, and I think Gandini actually designed the interior as well. And as you can see, it's as you'd expect from Citroen at the time. You have PRN, which stands for something that I can never remember, but it basically means like night rain something or other in French. You have rocker arm indicators and an indicator relay in this car from a Citroen SM. True story. It's the same, it's the little round, well, and 2 CVs, but that doesn't sound as exciting. So yeah, you have these non-cancelling indicators. They do not self-cancel because they're not connected to the steering column at all. You can hold them to do little, like, I'm just going to control this manually type thing. Lights are somewhat confusing because this, although it says side lights, that's dip beam headlights. If you take it down to dip beam headlights, then that's also dip beam headlights. And if you take it down here, the rear fog light comes on. That's not so confusing. But if you go back up to dip beam headlights and then you click this, now it's full beam headlights. Okay, that's fine. But if you go back up there to side lights, it's still dip beam headlights. Unless you do that, now it's side lights. So now it's side lights like that, or main beam, or unless you do that, and then it's dip beam and dip beam. Now, if I didn't know any better, I'd say someone's wired that wrong, but that is actually how they are. This is a flasher, which the Mark II does not have. Because when you've got it on dip beam headlights like this, you can still flash people. Unless you've got a Mark II, in which case you have to put it on main beam and then off main beam again. Speaking of switches that changed on the Mark II, on the other side we've got the same. At the top you have a rocker switch, and this is for the rear wiper, which on this car does not work. I think the fuse is blown. But you have a latching rear wiper, so it's on, off, or push it down, sprung loaded. That's your rear washer. Very interesting. Front wipers, another slider like the lights. You have intermittent, single speed, double speed, and if you don't want to burn the motor out, most special washer pump. For the love of God. Oh, there we go. Well, that was painful, wasn't it? It's very loud, I know. That's not a Mark I thing, that's a me thing. Also on this side you have the hazards and the heated rear window, which on this car does work, and a horn. In the centre here, as we can see, we have a bit of a Citroen type arrangement. So the first thing you'll notice, these buttons across the front, this adjusts your clock, hours, minutes. This is the trip reset. So the trip counter there, you push this, and that's the button that resets the trip counter. On this side, this button does nothing. I don't know if that does something on different models. I'm trying to think. I didn't say I was actually thinking, I'm trying to think. And this button here tests warning lights, which, oh, there we go. So you've got coolant level and coolant temperature. That's those two there. So the bulbs do work. The centre one is oil pressure. That is on because there's no oil pressure because the engine isn't running. And you have your battery charge light up there. Now you've got a bank of other lights up here, and I have to confess I don't know what they all do. There's your telltale for the lights. Headlights, not headlights. Headlights again, main beam, rear fog. Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that. Wow. There you go. So it is on main beam, right? This thing's been clicked in. Now it's not. Now it's dip beam, main beam. However, if I move this down, so we go to the rear fog lights, it automatically turns main beam off and forces it off because it's foggy, because you wouldn't have main beam in the fog, and puts the rear fogs on. Main beam off. How thoughtful is that? Wow, good old French. And then, yeah, that's basically the rest of it. Damn to try and get this rev counter to work, but it's not at the moment. When I did my rolling road run with it the other day, you see the revs going up, and then when it gets to the top, it flashes red at the top there to say, stop revving it, there is literally no point. Other differences in the Mark I to the Mark II, the heater controls. Now this is making a funny noise. I'll come back to that one later. You have your heater speeds there, That seals the outside world off completely. This changes where the air comes out, and that changes whether the air comes out with air or not, hot and cold. And if you were to have a more plush BX, you'd probably get some buttons here. You get front fogs on one of these if you've got a GT, and I'm pretty sure the Digit had something there as well. In fact, the Digit had another button. It had an extra one for the trip computer, which was like round there somewhere. I forget exactly. Mark 1s also have, well, plusher Mark 1s, carpeted bits of dashboard, fully carpet on the bottom corner of the door panel there, carpet down there, even a bit of carpet there, look, here. Very nice. And this steering wheel, which is thin, single spoke, and you cannot remove it. You have to disconnect the steering column further down there. No column stalks. There's your Mark 1. The Mark 2. So as you can see, a pretty different beast really. I quite like the fact this little square hole at the bottom of the steering wheel here is almost reminiscent of the one on the Mark 1. Except the Mark 1 wheel would have just done this. This one has a 4-spoke wheel. That's not a Mark 2 thing, because the earlier Mark 2s did have a single spoke wheel, although it was a big chunky spoke, and it was probably made of 2 individual spokes inside. I don't know. I've never taken one apart. So the Mark 2 changed quite a bit, as you can see. Much more conventional. We have something wrong with the indicators. Ah, the rear lights aren't plugged in. Yeah. We have a column stalk. To put the lights on, you twist it, that's the side lights, and that's the headlights. And that's it. That's how simple that is. Main beam, on. But there's no flash when the lights are on. There's your headlights. I want to flash someone. I can't. I have to go like that. And if you want to flash twice, you have to go. That's a bit silly. Also silly is the rear wiper, which on this car does not latch. So for the hatchbacks, they stopped making the wiper latch. I'm not entirely sure why. Wipers are the same at the front. We have intermittent, single, and fast. I'm not going to turn them off actually because the washer bottles aren't in, so there's no. Oh no, you muppet. I'm sorry, car. Sorry. There we go. Right. Yeah, so it's much more conventional. We've got conventional dials. We don't have the bathroom scales arrangement. Although it's worth pointing out some of the Mark 1s did have conventional dials. The GT and the Sport had round dials taken from the CX GTI. It's all very Peugeot, to be honest with you, this kind of thing. Something... I think the heater resistor might have died. Actually, no, I think it might be the board behind the... Yeah. So, yeah, very conventional from that point of view. The pod up here is still kind of a bit Citroen-y, isn't it? That pod thing is not... It's not conventional. Yeah. Down here, we have an ashtray, because French. And in the ashtray, you have a little shelf to put your cigarette and a little stubby thing to stub your cigarette out on. They think of everything, as long as it relates to smoking. And that is... Oh, that's a glove box catch. Because the glove box isn't fitted. You're probably looking at that going, what the hell's going on there? Like I say, it's being worked on. Here you have a coin holder. Francs, I imagine. This is non-standard, this little LED thing. Higher spec models would have the door open diagram light up thingy that was on the Mark 1 down there, but this is not a higher model. As I pointed out, it is a TXI. The radio is hidden down there, right out of reach, but also out of sight. But yeah, other than that, it's a pretty sort of standard conventional design in comparison to the Mark 1, but really it's still pretty out there, isn't it? And can I make an admission? Something that this is going to divide people. I prefer the Mark II. The interior. I just prefer the Mark II. Don't get me wrong, the Mark I is very cool. There's lots of cool little features. You often find things on a Mark I, like those lights just now, where you think, oh, I didn't realise it did that. But I just prefer, if I had to drive one a long way, I prefer the Mark II. I don't really get on with that as much. I prefer this. Sorry. I'll hand in my Citroen card now. The telltales are nicer on the Mark II as well, like in the middle there. But if I put the rear fog on, with main beam on, look, it doesn't make main beam come off. I could be an idiot. I could drive down the road with the rear fogs on and main beam. There's no cure for stupid. This is not a foolproof car. That one is. Ever noticed the difference in the mirrors on BXs? No? You're not the only one, but they changed. These ones actually carried on being used on the AX after the Mark I BX had ended. And this one is, I think, the same as a Peugeot 309. So you could say, in theory, electric mirrors were something that came later on the Mark II, because you couldn't get electric mirrors in this design, but you could with this design. Strange as well, because if you have manual mirrors like this one, the whole mirror adjusts. If you have electric mirrors, it doesn't. It's the glass inside. What other little differences can you tell? How about the wheel arch? It's bigger and more flared on the Mark II. Same with the one at the back. Smaller, bigger. Unless you have an estate, in which case it uses the Mark I back end, including the bumper, because they never bothered changing it. Now, clever people are going to try and say that the Mark II has a side repeater and the Mark I does not. But this is incorrect, because the Mark I did get side repeaters when they became mandatory in the UK, and in other markets they may have had them from new, but this one just doesn't have one because it's that early. That one had them when they were mandatory. The difference is, though, you are kind of right in that the ones on the Mark I would have been the same as a CX. They would have been the round type. Wheel trims? Well, Mark I's and Mark II's did have their own wheel trims for sure. They definitely didn't include that. That's like from Les Smith or something. But kind of right, because those wheel trims there on this Mark I were not used on the Mark II. They were used in a different colour, so they weren't grey plastic with black inserts like that. They were actually all silver, same wheel trims painted all silver. Side note and fun fact, those are Imperial. They have a 14-inch wheel rim. But the really, really early BXs had metric wheels, and a lot of people will go, oh, yeah, no, they were alloys though. Except they weren't. The original Steelies for BXs were also metric, 365mm. You can tell those because they have a slightly bigger dish here. There's a slight difference in how this wheel trim meets the edge of the rim, because they're different wheel trims. Also, can we just appreciate the design here? These little ridges here. The valve cap is hidden in one of them. Because the dashboard's different, the design of the door cards is different too. Look, this is the Mark I. This is the Mark II. As you can see, some noticeable differences. This bit mainly, although things like the door handles, the grab handles, this soft bit at the top, everything like that, the bin down here, that all stayed the same, but this was all completely new. The Mark I doesn't have speakers in the doors at all. It never did. It had a stretchy pocket here, and the TRS had a carpeted section here. Now, a TZS would also have a carpeted section here, but totally different. And that bit there kind of incorporates into the end of the dashboard, but not really. This is all one piece on a Mark II, whereas on a Mark I, this is separate. Nothing at all. This line is the same, but it's covered by this. So in theory, you could put Mark I door cards into a Mark II and then ruin them by screwing all that stuff over the top, but you couldn't do it the other way around. Another difference relating to the doors is those speakers. Because the Mark II has speakers mounted in the door, the Mark I doesn't. The door skin is slightly different. Not much, but a bit. Now there are some people who will be watching this at the moment, some, hopefully, and you'll be saying, oh, I know all this stuff, like this is like big whoop. Alright, fine. Shall we up the ante a little bit? Shall we get really nerdy? Let's get really nerdy. See the headlining in the Mark 1? See the effect? The pattern? It continues down the A-pillar trim. And the B-pillar trim. And the C-pillar trim. Does a Mark 2 do this? Well, it's hard to tell because they're so dark inside when they're black you can't really see, but I can give you the answer. The answer isn't always a dragon. The answer is no. They do not. Now you're looking at this going, oh yeah, but you've said so over and over and over again that this isn't a top spec model, so it wouldn't be the same. The 16 valve also does not have that, which is actually making me think, no, there aren't any that would match. Damn. The headlining, however, in the Mark II is the same as the one in the Mark 1. It is exactly the same. It is just the plastic is not trimmed. Not nerdy enough for you? Okay, let's have a look underneath. Here is the Mark 1's fuel cap. Here is the Mark 1's bumper. Underneath the Mark 1's bumper is, hopefully not too much rust, not a lot of stuff. Here is the Mark II's fuel cap. Here is the Mark II's bumper. Behind this is another fuel tank. Now that isn't a Mark II thing. That is not something that all Mark 1s had and Mark 2s didn't. However, it is only the Mark 2s that have that option. It's the bigger engine cars that have it, and then the later last of the line models like this, the range extender fuel tank. I think it adds another 15 litres, 12, 15 litres, something like that. Mark 1s don't have it because the bumper isn't big enough to accommodate it. There's a fairly famous Mark II. I have to use this one, not the one outside, because it has something. Abs. That's not a Mark II thing. Not all Mark IIs have abs. That Mark II doesn't have abs. But only Mark IIs have the option of having abs. No, ABS. ABS. Likewise, only Mark IIs have the option of a turbo diesel engine. Both of these are 1.6 petrols. This is true, but the only diesel you can get in a Mark 1 is the 1.8 or 1.9 litre naturally aspirated versions, badged 17 and 19. You want a turbo diesel? You've got to have a Mark II. They didn't come out until 1987. Not geeky enough for you still. Okay, here is a Mark 1 door. The rear door cards did not change, but the rear door did. See? Can you see it? Or can you not see it? That would be because the Mark 1 has a straight line down here. Please excuse the rust. Mark 2 has a bulge here to accommodate bigger wheels, because they knew that was coming. So it has to have a door with a recess in it to accommodate the bulge. So for that reason, you can fit Mark II doors onto a Mark 1, but you cannot fit Mark 1 doors onto a Mark II. Really? Not geeky enough? You knew that already? Right, okay. Your funeral. If we are to open said rear doors and ignore the mess, because it hasn't been cleaned in here yet. Why is it all oh, it's the plastic down there, look. The cellophane, it is aging, isn't it? That's the cellophane from new, believe it or not. Look at the shape of the tunnel. Yes? Would you look at that? It's different. Why has it got a bigger bulge? Well, because some Mark II cars had a bigger diameter exhaust with a silencer there. Cars like the 16 valve. And in cars with fuel injection, they had a bigger diameter exhaust pipe, different types of fixings, and they needed a bigger tunnel because otherwise it rubbed. There you go. Is that geeky enough? I think that's geeky enough. What else have I missed? Go for it. Stick some stuff in the comments. But before you do, consider this list of things I put together, which are things that people are often wrong about, things that people, myths that people think are differences between Mark 1 and Mark 2s, but are not. In fact, it's fair to say there is more difference between these cars due to just evolution of the model than there are down to the fact they're Mark 1 and Mark 2s. Don't believe me? Alright, let's rattle off a list. You'd have to be pretty silly to think that the rear lights are different between Mark 1 and Mark 2. Yes, these two are different, but many Mark 2s have this design. Now, there is a circuit board behind that, a bulb holder if you like, that is actually different, that was unique to the Mark 1, but it was replaced before the Mark 1 finished production, so that is not a change between the two. This car has smoke lights. They came out originally on the Phase 2 16 valve in 1989, and they were adopted by the rest of the range shortly after. And while we're at the back of the car, no, the spoiler is not one of the things, because although that car doesn't have a spoiler, and this car does have a spoiler, and you might be looking at that going, ah yeah, but none of the Mark 1s had that spoiler. Only the Mark 2s, things like the GTI and the 16 valve, the early one, and blah blah blah. You don't get to see that on a Mark 1, do you? Oh, that's unfortunate. Oh, and again, how about the injection, fuel injection? Is that a difference between Mark 1 and Mark 2s? No. You could get Mark 1s with fuel injection. Not in this country, admittedly, but in Europe there were 19 TRI models. I think some of them had catalytic converters. We're talking back in probably 85, 86, but not in this country. Now the badging between these cars also, I realise all of this is at the back at the moment, the badging between these cars is rather different, but that is not a Mark 1 and Mark 2 thing, because that is just a later style of badging that came in at about 92 to bring it in line with the ZX and the XM and everything like that. They even started putting the engine size on the side. However, many Mark 2s had badges like this, although some people will be looking at this and going, but it's got a chevrons there and they're metal. I'm afraid the early Mark 2s were as well. Here's another common one. Plastic. Metal. No, really, it is. Look, it has a metal bonnet. That one is only plastic. See? Why is that? Well, all BXs had plastic bonnets to start with. The only ones that didn't were diesels. So the Mark 1 diesels had metal bonnets, presumably, well, not all of them, I should say, the earliest ones had metal bonnets, presumably to deal with noise. For some reason, many Mark 2s, many late Mark 2s also have a metal bonnet like this one, and to be honest, I don't entirely know why. They obviously decided at some point that the metal bonnet wasn't needed on diesels. I imagine they just had loads of stock kicking about. So, yeah, eventually when they got to this kind of age, they thought, oh, we better use those up. Here's another one. That. No, not the sticker, although it does still have its protective film on. Look, it makes it look blue. No, that's a B1 gearbox. So reverse is over to the side, pull the collar, over it goes, up, there's reverse. A later gearbox, Michael Carrick. I don't know why there's a Michael Carrick in this car, it came with it. The gear pattern down there on later cars changes, and reverse is not here anymore. It appears underneath fifth, sort of there, but you can't because there is no reverse there. That's not a Mark 1 thing. That didn't happen until about 1988. Now, if we're looking under the bonnet of the Mark 1, there are a couple of other differences. Look in the scuttle. What are these differences? Well, a very early Mark 1 has a top-mounted windscreen washer pump, which doesn't fit. It doesn't matter, it's actually fake. The new one is underneath there. They ditched this in about 1984, 85, and they also changed the heater. You see, in the Mark 1, tilt your head. There you go, you see the mesh. The heater blower motor is in the cabin in a Mark 1. This Mark II has it in the scuttle here, so you think, oh, is that a difference? Is that a difference between the Mark I and the Mark II? No, because the Mark I got it in about 1985. It's just an updated design. The washer pumps on this car are the conventional push-in type. Can't really see them. Pushed into the bottle. Most BXs have them. There you go. Again, that's not a Mark I thing or a Mark II thing. Most BXs have that. It was only the very, very early ones like this that had the suction pump in the cap. One thing you might notice, this Mark II doesn't have sound deadening. This Mark I does. They actually got rid of that. They cheaped out. So the later 1.6s, of which are obviously all Mark IIs, didn't get that sound deadening. They might have some more inside possibly, but otherwise it is XU5 engine with single point injection, XU5 engine with a big fat carburetor on the front. Oh, I've got a good one. That brace running underneath the engine on a Mark I, but not on a Mark II. No, early Mark IIs had those. Oh wait, hang on, that subframe's got bearings in it. A bearing subframe on a Mark I. That's a Mark I thing, isn't it? Mark IIs don't have that. Well, no, that's true. Mark IIs don't have that, but then neither do all Mark Is, because they ditched that in 1985, and the Mark I didn't end production until 1986. Oh, here's one. Remote locking. That's a Mark II thing, isn't it? No, it's not, because the Digit had this, and that's a Mark I. And this isn't for that car, so I don't know. Yeah. How about green tinted windows? I mean, that's a Mark II thing, isn't it? No. 1988. Might have even been 1989, come to think of it. It wasn't a Mark I thing to have brown tinted windows, or in TRS's case, no tinted windows, because it doesn't. It's completely clear. Well, I think that's the barrel suitably scraped. That's all the differences between a Mark I and a Mark II. Did I miss anything? If I did, write it in the comments. Do so at your own peril. I bet I didn't. Hopefully.